Hello everyone! So, this video is going to be outright for the potential GMs for Cyberpunk Red. I've done a lot for players, but this one is definitely going to be just to help people get their foot in the door for running games. By the time I'm done here, I'm hoping to have you at least comfortable enough to give this a shot. This will be general tips, advice from my own mistakes, and even a bit of a guide at the end on putting your own gig together for a bunch of new players. This will contain ad-libbed thoughts, examples I've experienced, and just normal advice from stuff I've dealt with as a GM coming into Red from 5th edition D&D a while back. But first, introductions. Hi, I'm Dice. I'm just a guy who likes tabletop things, and I'm a Cyberpunk fan. Let's get to it. Formalities done. So, you decided to give Cyberpunk Red a shot. You have done one of two things, I hope, by now. 1. You picked up the Core Rulebook. Or 2. You've gotten your hands on Easy Mode, which is a booklet of free rules for the game on DriveThruRPG. If you don't have the Core Rulebook, get Easy Mode. Don't worry, I've got a link down below in the dooblie-do. While I recommend Easy Mode up and down for first-timers, I just hope this explanation will be enough to let you see there's not really any magic to this. There's a few resources that I do recommend you have, but I'm not going to go into them here. I'll just make sure to put that in the description, and I'll also put what pages you can find those on, just so you don't have to look through the video for that. You can just look below and boom, you'll know where to turn to. I'm trying to keep flipping through the book back and forth as far out of this as I can for you. Getting into Cyberpunk Red when you've not had a hand in the world before can kind of be intimidating. I mean, the core rulebook is 450 pages, and that's a whole lot of lore to soak in. You'll also definitely run into folks who encourage you to tap into the 2020 era as well for lore. I'm gonna say something now that I expect many won't agree with me with. Don't. If you try to memorize a whole world, including its whole history at your very first sit-down, you're gonna drive yourself crazy. There is also a good 25 years of world building that has happened between the 2020 era and the time of the Red, which is 2045. While going back to 2020 is good to do to get inspiration or answer potential questions you may have down the road, starting out though, you don't need it. You'll overload yourself, don't do it. Don't go too big too quick. Now when I say don't go too big too quick, I do mean it. Your players will be just as new as you, and what you put in front of them, they'll believe is fully ready and fleshed out. A big mistake I've always made is I'll put down an entire giant map in front of a table and then expect my players to go to the little spot that I prepared. No, they'll go everywhere, but they'll go everywhere except where you want them to go. Night City is bigger than you expect it to feel, trust me. You'll prepare a gig at one bar, and then they'll suddenly go to a different one on the other side of the city you didn't even really know existed. While it's tempting to throw the whole Night City map down in front of them because, well, it's cool, hold off on that until after this first session you aim to run. So that way you just focus on that one small area where they're going to be at. Set the expectation that this will be you and them learning together and getting a handle on the vibe first before you start blazing through Little Europe. Start small. Even just a city block if you really want to prep stuff out. That little gig I told you about at the end here will have the same mentality, but I'm going to continue first with the tips before we start talking about how your players are going to go into the world. Now, a real big piece of advice. Every single game I've started up for newer players, they always wonder what roles they need to fill. It's completely natural. People do think they have to be sure that there are supporters, healers, tanks, DPS, you name it. In this day and age of gaming, you kind of expect that. That's not really the case in Red though. Be sure to make sure players know that they don't need to be a medtech or something just because the crew doesn't have one. As odd as it sounds, I still have yet to have a solo in the games I run. But I also have a bunch of heavy role players around me who shoot for theme over optimization, min-maxing, and combat. They don't really care about the numbers, they just want to have fun. Not every table is the same. I say that all the time, but encourage your players to really play what they want. In Easy Mode, it doesn't have creation rules, but it does have pre-mades that you can just hand out to your players too, if they just want to keep things simple and quick. For the game itself though, and preparing it, I'll be the first to tell you that Easy Mode's included gig, called Getting Paid, has started my current main campaign for me. So, if you don't want to put it together yourself and just want to use the pre-made one, go for it. It gives your players a nice chunk of change, gives them a taste of some corruption, lets them get some payback on someone who wronged them. You can't really go wrong with it. This is not going to be the first time I remind you, of course, that you don't really have to write some magnum opus for a first game. Don't compare what you're about to go into with any live games that you've watched. The worst thing you can do is compare yourself to a live actual play, by which I mean a live stream of Cyberpunk Red being played or a podcast. Don't put those standards on yourself. What you need to do, though, is first take a look at your crew. And it's only so you can gauge what you're getting into. The design of Cyberpunk Red lets a lot of character-driven plots begin even in creation, but this is mostly just to see if you need to prepare a little extra. If you've got a netrunner in your crew, that's a real big thing to note. Got a nomad? Don't be afraid to prep something car-wise, but as for the other roles, there's not any really major specific things you need to make. On page 395 of the Core Rulebook, there is a huge section on beat charts for story making. If you do have the Core Rulebook, I really recommend peeking at it, but you're not really going to need to look at that though from this point forward. You don't need to look at the book at all. It's just you and I now, okay? So to set this up, we'll be keeping this street level, personal, and direct. First thing is first, just pick one of your players mentally. They'll be who gets a sudden phone call on their agent, which, for the record, is a complex smartphone at the time. This call is going to be the main hook for the full setup that's going to be happening. No matter how you decide to start your game for them, be it them all meeting in a bar or even just all waking up drunk and beat up in a back alley, this is going to be the hook for the gig. You can start this game however you feel, but I do recommend making sure your players are all in the same spot, or you may spend an hour getting them from every corner of the city to the exact same area. Trust me, sometimes it can take 2 hours. It's a real struggle. The call will be from someone that they're familiar with, a bodega owner that owns the spot they go to buy things. This owner will be calling for help, immediate help, as they're currently being robbed. And in some quick back and forth conversation, make sure that bodega owner shares that how many are there that they know about, identify at least that one of the group is from Maelstrom, because everyone loves tearing up some Maelstrom, and that when the call gets noticed, the line goes dead. Nice and simple, makes it personal, and gives a sense of urgency. The bodega itself will be a block away from wherever the players wake up. So the players can make a quick response, but in transit between, of course, point A and point B, let them have enough time to quickly talk back and forth so that they can actually get some planning done. Giving time to plan is super important here, as most hear going into Red that it's a very deadly game. I made a video about how deadly it actually is. It isn't as much as folks may let you think, but it's wise to take stealth and planning into anything they do. During this time, allow some roles to give information out about the bodega that they're heading to. Use the fact that it's a common spot for one of the characters. Using the skills of local expert and concentration won't steer you wrong here for just letting them remember information about it. A general layout of the building, if they got cameras, things like that, just to give your players a bit of an edge going into this instead of just going in blind and guns blazing. Which is not a bad idea, it's just it can have a bit more of a consequence than they expect. But this though is the perfect time to make sure that netrunner on your team, if you have one, is made aware of cameras there. That'll tip them off that there actually is a net architecture that operates the cameras, so they'll get to do some running. But let them prepare a plan, and if they have a good one, don't punish them for good planning. I've had major boss battles be destroyed just because a player was clever the week before. This is not you versus your players. You're all having fun together here. You're not trying to beat them and they're not trying to beat you. Now let's talk about what they'll see on arrival. Your standard corner store is all I want you to keep in mind. The gas station you go to pick a drink up from, the corner store on the ground floor on the street, that's what you're coming up to. No matter the layout you choose in your head, just make sure you include a backroom area in office, let it have some street-facing windows, a door that raises and lowers with a grate, think a garage door, and of course, rows of shelves and the counter. If you want inspiration and something you can visualize, if you played Cyberpunk 2077, use the bodega from the Braindance tutorial Judy puts you through. You can actually go visit that place. It's actually still in the game, and if you go visit it, you'll notice a smell of bleach. I'm not kidding. It's actually pretty funny. Now, as for things your players can potentially tap into for an advantage, have of course a power box outside, a potential access point or two for your netrunner in the form of a roof antenna or outside cameras, and just be sure that you do have a back door so that there is a back way in, just in case they want to go that route. Don't overthink the building, but just give them some options so that once they do roll up to it, they don't only just have the front door as a place to go in. A good example is, for that netrunner, make sure that the net architecture will be capable of controlling lights, the automatic doors to lower, and camera systems so you could even have them see inside. Let that power unit be able to kill lights and security. You get the drift. You get the drift. Have ways that they can tilt the odds a little bit in their favor if they just pay attention. But what about opposition? So, pulling from easy mode, on page 36 of that, you have a stat block for dirty cops. feel free to just directly use that stat block for the Maelstrom gangers. If you want some diversity, throw in one that's wielding a shotgun or a melee weapon. Remember, this is getting your new players used to a fight, and you getting used to running one. Don't overthink it, and those very heavy pistols in the stat block do really hurt. And using the same rule as Easy Mode does for its dirty cops, have as many of those gangers there as your players, but add 2 more. Put 2 of them in the back room ransacking the office looking for any hidden goods, put one behind the counter currently actively beating the bodega owner who is still holding onto consciousness, and have 1 or 2 more still holding civilians up against the wall, robbing them actively. This will give a good dynamic situation and makes it clear that there's no right solution to this. If you go to save the bodega owner, you might have the civilians get hurt, or vice versa. It makes it so that there is odds no matter which way they go. But proper planning, things can go good, or they could go bad. You may even have players who won't care about collateral damage or the civilians. But at least this way, there is an obstacle to overcome either way. And now, just let the fight play out really. Let them go in quiet, let them try to distract, or let them go gung-ho and wipe everybody out. Prepare though for a few different outcomes. 1, they do save the bodega owner. 2, they fail to save the bodega owner or any civilians. And 3, they fail to save the bodega owner but save the civilians. If the owner is saved, let him offer up a reward of either 250 eddies per person or some goods from the shop. If he dies, make it clear that his register and safe were indeed cracked and left wide open. And if they dip into that, make it a good 300 to 400 eddies per character. But if civilians survived, they'll be witnesses to the player's own ransacking and robbery of the store. And well, if everyone does die, no one will really know. Except if the players don't pay attention to that camera system above them, there's evidence and security footage of them basically being scavengers. There's a lot of angles you can take, and trust me, you won't plan for everything your players may do. There is, though, one of 2 other outcomes. All the Maelstrom die, or they don't. One of my absolute favorite things to do is that if someone that is an enemy survives, I have them come back later a bit more wiser or better equipped. So, take note. Even the one little scamp they let run away to send a message can come back another time wielding a flamethrower and have a vendetta. It's a carryover from one of my favorite games, and I always do this when I can. It keeps the game feeling personal, and it's not just meatbags of HP being thrown at my players. Now from here, we get into the open question of, what's next? Well, the world really is the oyster, isn't it? One thing that happens even in games you plan as super simple is that little things will start to sprout. Small ideas, little connections, random out-of-the-blue questions, or even players trying to link up with characters that they may have rolled in their life paths. But that's if they had made their actual characters rather than using a pre-gen. Make a note anytime someone does this, and use it. Every little seed that starts to sprout is your campaign already starting for you. Again, I want to reinforce that while getting the core book and letting your players make their character is awesome, you do not need to do that for your very first game. Easy Mode has pre-made characters, it'll take care of everything for you. You don't need to write a grand masterpiece of a gig if you decide to do it yourself, just keep it simple and make it personal. Don't try to prepare all of Night City, focus on a single city block. If you do feel you need a bigger area, then just pick a single district like Pacifica or Little Europe. Don't worry about needing to study things like it's a college exam. And you don't have to know years and years and years and years of backstory to really know what's going on and make a good story yourself. All you need to do is just to make sure your table is having a good time with what you have and what you know. You don't need to be a scholar. You just have to know a few pages in the book and make sure they're laughing while you're using it. No Night City is the same. No table plays the game in the same way. And, if anything, break the rules of the game where you want to, as long as it's to give your players some fun, not to screw them over. If you're not making mistakes, you're not really trying hard enough in my opinion. My first session was a nightmare and a mess, and it's completely fine if yours is too. Don't worry about being perfect. Your friends will just love you for letting them play. Take care everyone, and I hope you find yourselves a good table, or I hope you make yourself a good table.